Hi there, this is Popo, I hope you're all fine. Welcome back to the Matches New Era Tournament, round 1. And today we're going to review the two games played between 1254 and Alexander the Wanderer. So, let's get started. Okay, so for this first game, 1254 gets the white pieces with the Nagas faction, and Alexander the Wanderer gets the black pieces with the humans faction. Funny enough, we will have some classic chess about the board on one side of the board. Just to remind yourself, the humans faction, despite being the classic chess faction, is also strong and balanced compared to the other faction. Why? Because first, the range pieces, which are the rook, the bishop, and the queen, are unlimited range pieces compared to all the other faction which has a limited range. The second thing is that the pawn type units can promote on the back rank as queen type units compared to all the other faction we can promote only to rooks, bishops or knight. And especially in this faction, Nagas, it can only promote to rook. But the knight type unit has no power, so this is the weakest knight of the game, so you have to deal with it. On the other hand, the Nagas faction is a very strong faction and crazy. I mean, there's a second crazy faction which are the Carbuncles, but funny enough, 1254 also plays it on the tournament. I don't know, he likes weird faction. The Nagas faction is a faction that allows you to get some massive pawn storm over the board. And it has been accompanied by a very strong queen. I mean, this is the strongest queen of the board. It was almost 2 queens, just to show you at which point it's strong. So you're going to discover how it's done. See that some pawns are a little buffed here thanks to the pieces. For example, these pawns are on the same rank as the snakes. So as a matter of fact, they're able on their first move to move up to 4 squares, but jumping. So here, this means that as a first move, you can decide to play this, for example. So when I'm talking about pawn storm, I'm not joking. This is very serious. The only other way the pawn can be buffed is by the Empress. Every pawn in front of the Empress, during the time it is in front of the Empress, can move up to a queen 2 squares. So that's very cool. So the game starts with pawn to a4, pawn to e5, now we have snake to a2, a very typical Naga move. Now every pawn can be buffed for very credible advance. So now the pawn storm is ready, and this is very hard to face that. Pawn to d5 is played. For me, this is opening a little too much the field, but why not? Maybe Alexander has a plan here. So we have pawn to d3, bishop to e6, so I guess planning to just get a discover attack over the snake, and we have empress to d2. For now, nothing to worry about. We have knight to f6 defending the pawn, although I guess in this position, try to castle as long as you can, because here your king is pretty exposed, and once the Empress would be on the field, you would face a lot of problems. But knight to f6 is played, okay. Pawn to f5 is played, so now it's attacking the bishop, so the bishop retreats to d7, and now you see that he can decide now to take directly here, and if the knight recaptures, then the Empress will recapture. But 1254 decides to go for something else, and decides to launch immediately the g-pawn. So it attacks the knight, and the knight goes back to g8. So again, taking this pawn seems to be a very good way of improving the position, but 1254 rather wants to play pawn to f4. I can't really understand why, but why not? Here Alexander decides to play pawn to h6 and challenge a little the structure, but this is still defended. I mean, after all the captures, the Emperor is still here to defend the wall stuff. Pawn captures e5 is played because this pawn was just free, and after pawn captures g5, now we have a castle. So, I mean, the development of 1254 is better than the one of Alexander, but I mean, this is normal because you don't have a lot of pieces to develop with the Nagas, and the position seems interesting. What should make the Nagas fail to make their attack is that if these two pawns disappear, that would be a very hard time for 1254. So here a pawn to c6 is played, so now the pawn is now defended, and the pawn is launched to b5. This is a pretty move, as if this is captured, then this is captured the other way. Even if I don't feel really concerned about this, I mean, playing, for example, let's say you play this pawn here, you will have some chain, and then you can slide this, and you put the Empress here, you have a good position. So I'm not worried with this. So pawn to e5, why not? We have pawn to g6, so trying to challenge a little. Here, actually, what would be better here is to try to play the other pieces. I mean, this queen is not playing on the game. Maybe queen here or queen here is a good way of gaining some pressure over there. But okay, why not? Pawn to g6 is played, trying to get some pressure, but now we have pawn to g4 defending, and now rook to h4 attacks this pawn. And now, do you know how to defend this pawn? Because basically, for example, if you decide to go here with the Empress to defend, then you run into the queen going here with some kind of skewer. So let's say you decide to take the queen, then this is taken one time, and then the Empress is attacked. This is down now to range 3 instead of range 4. This is a consequence of losing 1 life. And you see that with a range 3 queen and 2 rooks against all the material black has, normally you can't face it. The white pieces are winning the game for me. So this is why in this position, Empress to e1 is played, and what's cool is that this pawn now that is buffed defends this pawn here. So we have queen to b6 check, king to g2, and now bishop to g7. So adding pressure here over this pawn. So you have to defend it. Empress to g3 is played, so now it defends furthermore the pawn here, attacks the rook, defend this pawn, and also defend this pawn. So you see that this very strong queen has a lot of value here and can do several things at once as long as there are pawns in the game. So rook goes back to h7, and now we have pawn captures g6, pawn takes g6, and pawn takes g5. For me, pawn takes g5 is not that accurate. I guess I would rather play first pawn to e6, and now you see that the bishop is a little annoyed, and after a pawn to c8, let's say, you can decide to play pawn to e5, Empress to e5 check, and this is devastating because here you have to do something about that. You can't take the Empress here because else the king is going to be captured, so this is not possible. So after this, and this, basically the only thing left to do is to capture with the bishop, and then you go with the Empress with check, and now you have to be sure you're dead. For example, let's say knight goes here, then you just have to go here, this is check. This can't be captured, else the king is going to be captured. Remember that it has two lives. So for example, let's say king goes to d7, and then you just snap the rook, knight 7. And now you see that the Nagas are pretty good in this position. This bishop is attacked, you have to do something, and you don't have a real good counter against this. So here, capturing on g5 for me was a mistake, because it can run now into a bishop to h3 check. And you see that thanks to the queen here, the king can't defend the snake, and this is taken for free. And even if you try to take, for example, the Empress, this is taken one time, and again, you're done too much material for this, and you don't have even the range to capture back the rook. So for example, you have to give a check back here, but you don't have all the advantage of this because it has one life left, so it can be captured for free. So in this position, we have bishop to e6 instead, so unfortunately bishop to h3 is not seen, but bishop to e6 comes with a concrete idea not to let this pawn be pushed, which is understandable. But we have Empress to g4, which is, I don't know, a blunder or brilliancy, I don't know. For me it's a big blunder here, because you just let your Empress be captured. So this is what happens in the game, this is capture once, and the Empress takes the bishop. But at the same point, it infiltrates a little, there's two pawns here, there's the snake, so maybe there's something to do. But for me, this is so easier for black to simplify the position and gets better here. So let's see how it's played in the game. We have knight to e7 defending, and now we have snake to f4. So now the threat is to go here with check and try to grab, I don't know what, but grab some concrete stuff. But queen to e3 is played, and now the snake is attacked. So you have to do something in order to save the life. Also, be careful, because even if you, for example, try to go with the king to f7, now you run into a very big anger from the humans with queen takes e2 check. Let's say the king moves to g3, then the simple queen takes h2 is already menacing, and there may be a mating sequence right now. So Yeah, you have to be very careful because of the long range. With matches, you're so used to short range, like range 3, range 4, that sometimes you don't see the piece attacked range 5. So Empress to g4 is played, so now it's very interesting because at first it attacks the knight here, it attacks this, it defends the snake, so there's multiple threats at once. But the biggest threat was not the knight, because after knight to d7, even giving up the knight, actually, 1, 2, 5, 4 playing this position, it's knight to f8 check, and the king is forced to capture, or the knight could capture. But now you see that this pawn is buffed, so he takes the queen. And suddenly, black is almost, I say almost, lost in this position. Because it has the activity back, it can still try to hang on, but it has to play very precisely to be sure not to have any trouble. So we have knight captures e5, attacking the Empress, we have Empress to f4, and now we have rook to e8. I'm not sure if rook to e8 is that precise here. Maybe you should try to continue hunting the Empress if you can. But now we have pawn to e4, which is played, so trying to attack little. But now we have rook to h5, and pawn to h4 is played. And here, when there's a pawn near an Empress, you always have to be careful, else you're going to get screwed. And this is exactly what happens in the game, because after bishop to h6, you have Empress to f6. And now you have to be real precise, else you're going to blunder a piece. In the game, king to g8 was played, which is a big mistake. Here, the best move to be played here is knight to f7. It seems like that you restrict a lot your pieces and everything seems contained, but there's an attack here, of course this is defended, and like, the Nagas has to do something. And as there are a lot of pieces, you can do something. So for example, say you play king to f3, then you can have pawn captures e4, and this pawn can be captured, else there would be a discover attack somehow, or excuse me, here rather, and then you're going to lose the Empress. So see, playing the knight to f7 was best, but in the game king g8 is played, and it allows this awful combination. Empress to e6 check, king to f8, and now Empress to h3, and the rook is dead. Right? Dead. See, it has no square to survive. There's a pawn here. Incredible. So black loses a rook, and after Empress recaptures, now the bishop takes the pawn on e3. I mean, later on you have to take this pawn on a4, because here you have an isolated Empress, all the pawns are on this part of the board, so normally you'll be able to do a massive stuff. The only problem is here, bishop captures is not that precise, because the bishop is hanging right, but the knight is also hanging after this check. So again, knight to f7 was a little better to play. Because after bishop takes e3, now you have Empress to f6 check, king to g8, and now snaps the knight. And do you see now that white is completely winning in terms of material. So I'm not sure that black would survive this. Pawn takes e4, and Empress to e6 check. I mean, you could have taken this pawn, it's almost free, but why not? So Empress to e6, king to g7, and now Empress to e5 to check, and king to h6. Pawn captures, and pawn recaptures, and pawn to b5. So now you see that the snakes try to launch the pawns. And I mean, one of the ideas after this capture is to launch this pawn. And then you have some kind of double pawns, and you try to go for the endgame. So we have pawn to g5 in the position, and now pawn takes c6. And actually you should have taken here, because now, because of the pawn takes c6, you can't take, else you're going to lose your rook. So this is pretty pinned. But bishop to f4 is played, and it forced the Empress to go to e6, and now the path is cleared here, and you're sure that this pawn would never advance. So king to h5 is played after the Empress to e6 check, and pawn to c7. I have no idea why, because this can be simply snapped by the bishop here. One move that could be seen is Empress to d7, and now you have to be precise on what would defend what. Does it defend itself? I mean, the rook is threatened, so it has to move, for example, to defend the bishop, but the knight would be captured here. So The bishop also is threatened, so he can decide to move to defend the knight, but the rook would be captured, and so on and so on. So for me, in this position, unless I'm blind, for me a piece is going to be lost in the game. But 1254 decided to play king to h3, and this comes with a very concrete threat here, because technically if you manage to get this and then here, this is mate. So be careful here. So in the game, oh, the analysis stopped, let me check why. Oh yeah, because Alexander lost on time, so this is why the game stops here. So this is move on move 39 that Alexander the Wanderer lost on time, and I guess there was not much hope to get. Maybe you could get for some kind of endgame this, but no chance that you ever survive this. So I hope you like this game, and we're going to see game 2 of this encounter just now. Okay, so for the second game, Alexander the Wanderer gets the white pieces with the Genies faction, and 1254 gets the black pieces with the Carbuncles faction. The Genie faction is very interesting because it allows you to play with the boundaries of the board. So some pieces would be able to bounce off the board, can cross the board as this was cylindrical, so stuff, or just get stronger on the edges of the board. For the Carbuncle faction, the pattern of the pieces don't match at all. So normally, when a piece moves, it captures like it moves. But one piece which is a little weird is the pawn, that has a first move, a normal move, and a capture move, which are completely different. This is the case with the carbuncles. Every piece has a different pattern. So let me just get through it. The rook type units moves like a bishop, captures like a rook, but on its first move can move like a knight. The hare is knight, which moves like a rook, captures like a knight, and on its first moves I was thinking that it would move like a bishop, but here this is hard to develop, so it can just slide here up to 2 squares to jump. So very cool. This is the squirrel. So this bishop type unit moves like a knight, captures like a bishop, but on its first move it can move like a king. And finally we have the fox, which moves like a queen. It captures by jumping. Let's say that the front square was here, it jumps like this, and excuse me, and can match this, this, this. So very funny combination. So very hard as a piece, but it can defend itself around it. So very funny also. And as a first move, it can land on any empty square in the 2 last ranks. So you have to be very careful when you play against the carbuncles. Finally, the gems are pawns that are allowed on the first move to play 2 squares also diagonally, but they are just classic pawns. So you have to be very careful when you play against the carbuncles not to be tricked. The game starts with pawn to e4. We have gem to b6, pawn to b3, gem to e5, so I guess planning to unleash the hare here, and now we have vizier to b2. So this is a very classic move with the genies to put the fianchet to vizier. Why? Because these bishop type units can bounce off the edges of the word, up to 3 squares again. So very interesting, controls a lot of square this way. Here this pawn is attacked, so you have to defend it. One way of defending it is just to put the hare here, and it defends, and this is the very classic way of developing with the carbuncles. But instead we have square to d6, and now it defends because it captures like a bishop. So why not, but yeah, this square is not doing their job for now, but okay. Lamb to h4 is played. Okay, so I have to explain a little. The lamb here gets an additional 1-3 move, like this, like a camel, when it's on the edges on the board, and it counts also the back rank. So when it's on the edge, it's very powerful, so be careful. So it gets on h4, and now you see that it has a lot of squares. So this is also a classic way to develop the genies. So Alexander knows very well his genies theory. So now we have pawn to f6 because this was attacked this way. Here I'm not sure this is good. Again, I would develop the hare here. That would defend. At the same time, that would ask the lamb, what do you want to do? Do you want to exchange? And if he wants to exchange, then you can recapture with the crystal, and this crystal is like a rook, and suddenly it gets very interesting. although it can be very vulnerable if it gets attacked by a knight type piece or the vizier, so be careful, but this can be interesting later. So gem to f6 instead is played to defend, why not? And now we have pawn to d3. We have gem to g6, so I don't know why actually white is doing. I don't know if it black, excuse me. I don't know if he plans to castle. I don't know. Vizier to e2 is played, preparing to castle, and now we have gem to g5, kicking away the lamp. The lamp jumps to e3, and now it gets a very nice spot to control the light squares. So a move like heir to g7 would make sense. Also, don't think that these pieces are blocked, because it can go here for the squirrel, and on the first move can move like a knight for the crystal, so everything's fine here. But on the game square to g6 is played instead, this also works, and we have Jin to d2, so the development goes. We have quartz to f7, and here, okay, I'm really wondering what's the plan. I guess maybe is to just push here and try to get somewhere, why not? But your king's pretty exposed here. We have pawn to g3, I don't know, doing something, and now we have quartz to c6, and I think here this is a big inaccuracy, because, okay, you develop your quartz, but you don't have a lot of squares to go through here, because this is on the light squares, it moves like a bishop, so it's pretty doomed, actually. So for now, it doesn't make sense to go here, and you see that on the wall game, the quartz would be blocked. We have vizier to f3, so now it attacks here the squirrel, and it threats after the recapture, for example, to get here with the lamp, and that would be devastating. So against this, we have a gem to h5, even though, why not? I mean, we have lamp to e2, gem to e4 is played, and now we have vizier to g2 getting back. We have heir to e8. I don't understand this move, I have to say. For me, a more classical move would be heir to g7 again and trying to push here. That would make more sense. I don't know what heir to h8 is for. Maybe he wants to slide here and control that, but not convinced. So we have heir to h8, pawn to h3, and now gem takes h3, sphinx takes h3, and now there's a double attack going on later on this pawn. So be careful. Gem to b5 is played, and now vizier to f3 unleashes this attack. And now how do we defend that? That's pretty hard, I have to say, to defend this kind of position, because your quartz can't get here, your heir is not well placed to defend this. So in the position we have heir to h6, and normally you can just capture this way and then continue the game, captures. So nothing to worry about here. And even more, the heir here, this is very hard to defend this, so maybe you would be forced to put it on h7, and now this is dependent of this, so then you can put the lamp here and try to get some pressure by going on the edge of the board. So in the position, instead we have pawn to g4, which is played, and this is a big mistake actually on the game, because we have heir captures g4, vizier captures g4, gem captures g4, lamp captures g4, and you think that, okay, the material is equal. No, because you forgot one piece, the fox. The fox jumps to g2, and this is a fool, because it attacks this piece and this piece at the same time. So after king to d1 uncastling, you have fox captures g4, and now black is up a piece. But this fox is very vulnerable. Normally you get some big attack with the fox when you have coordination between all the capital pieces. So what I would like to do, just to remind yourself that this is attacked, and this threats to be checked with this. So lamp to g1 is played, and actually this is a great move because it defends a lot of squares actually here, the lamp, so it prevents, for example, the square to get here, as there's capture, recapture, and then basically you try to attack the fox later on. So very interesting actually. So as this pawn is defended, now the fox should get back and wait for an attack to come. But here the Cabocles were too greedy because they played gem to f5, and this is a blunder because you lose a piece, and you have to see how. Because of sphinx to g3. With the sphinx to g3, it x-rays the square which is undefended, and you can't even, and you can't even slide here to defend because this is controlled by the lamp. So here fox to h5 is forced, and after this sphinx takes, and the material is back to equal. And more on this, there's this threat of a big capture here, and you have to be very careful because once this is checked, so I don't know, let's say that you decide to move like this, then this is checked, the king is forced to get up. And now be careful, because you can have this move threatening the fox, and this threats to go here, because the Jin can travel horizontally and vertically the board as this was cylindrical, so it can just go here and perform a very powerful check and maybe a mate sequence. So this is a way of seeing this. So quartz to e6 is played instead, but now we have Sphinx to g8 check. And after king to f7, you'll say that this piece is out of reach because this is only range 4 with the Sphinx. The only problem is that the Sphinx can move and capture horizontally, so it goes the other way to capture the air. And this is okay, the game doesn't show that it goes the other way because you don't see it traveling, but it is concretely what it does on this move. So now the genies are back and are up material, so the game completely reversed in this position. And now you have to be very precise. So we have gem captures e4, and now the Sphinx goes to h1, so utilizing the ability and threatening the fox. As the fox is pretty weak, it has to go back, so it goes to f5, but it's still undefended, so now the Jin goes to g5, and remember the fox can only capture with this kind of 2 squares ring, so this is actually threatened, and you don't have a lot of pieces that can defend it, so the fox decides to go to f6, and suddenly you see that these pieces are completely stupid. They can't do anything. So this is why with carbon pulls, you have to be sure that your pieces have a lot of activity, else you're screwed, because they can't defend themselves against attacks, because they don't capture the same way they move. So Sphinx to b7 is played, and the threat is to capture here, and that comes with check. And you don't have a real way to defend this. So instead we have quartz to g4, which is played, and it attacks the Jin. So we have Sphinx to e7 check, the king goes to e6, and then Jin to e3. I mean, here you can try to get here. The only problem is that the Sphinx would be able to get back, and now with the Jin and the Sphinx you would have some problems. So king to e6 makes sense. Jin to e3, and now what to play? Actually, an interesting move to play would be to capture here, and somehow you try to get some activity with your pieces and try to put this here, or even put the fox, I don't know. At the same point, you have to be very, very careful, because after this, you can't really play this move, else you're going to run into this awful move, which pins the fox, and the fox is about to be captured next move. So be careful. But instead, fox to f5 is played, and this is a blunder, technically, because now the Jin goes to g8 to e8 by sliding down, and this is check, and now you have to be careful where you move. The only move that saves a little the position would be to play king to f6, and it works on the fact that thanks to this fox, this ring is controlled, so you wouldn't never have big troubles. But later on the game can continue, and you can have some big threats with the Sphinx going up and trying to go for mate and stuff. So you don't feel comfortable with this. But in the game, 1254 decided to play king to d5, and actually this position is straight up losing because this is a forced mate. And the forced mate starts with pawn to c4, gem captures, and here in the game pawn to c4 was played, and this is a mistake. Here the move you should play is Sphinx to a5 check. The king has nowhere to run because of this vizier, which controls all of these squares. So technically, you have to put something in the way. If you decide to put the squirrel, for example, here this is not defended, so you just have to capture this. And after this, for example, the king runs here, you just have to put the vizier now here, and now this is mate, because everything is controlled and you don't have anything to put in just... okay. The only way you can try to delay this is to play the quartz to b5. But here you have to be very precise on how you do this, because this is also losing. The way to get succeed is to play pawn takes c4. And now no piece can capture this, so the king is forced to go to c6. Then you slide the Jin to A8. No, here this is not really. I mean, maybe this works, but the only problem is that you have this move and then this is free. So no, this is not the way it's proceed. Excuse me. So after this you capture, you go here. Now first you have to play Sphinx to A6 because this can't slide this, and the king again is forced to get back on B7, and now the Jin goes to A8 and it does the job. This is checkmate. So this was a mate sequence that has not been seen. But in the game of pawn takes c4, quartz takes c4 is forced. Now pawn takes c4. King captures is not forced. But I mean, if you decide to go here, for example, for me you're straight up dead. You maybe run into the same position as before with this, and you see that the king doesn't have any square. He can decide to put the gem here in some kind of intermezzo, but now he would run into the Jin goes to c8. And now there's no way to really defend because this is mate technically and you don't have anything to interpose. So here in the position king takes c4 is okay, pretty false. But now the Jin goes to e2 and goes with check, and this is some kind of little crisscross applesauce. So if you see that the king is a little in danger, so king to d5 is forced. And now you have Sphinx to a5, which is played. Now we have king to e6, and you can now decide to take this if you want, but you can decide also to ignore that. One way to continue the game also is to play Jin to e8 with check, and now after this you have king to f6, and technically you can continue with capturing this with the Sphinx, and then you get up the other Sphinx. I don't know, I didn't study the line, but after this captures, here you have this, you can't get down, so you, oh, I mean this is made here. Wait, no, this is not made because there's still this square, because the lamp is controlling these back squares. So I think there should be some kind of way to finish the game. I didn't study that, but or maybe you capture with this, and now you don't have any squares left, so you're forced to capture with the squares, so then you capture this. Here the king is forced to move, and now there's this mate ladder with this. I mean, maybe this is the way to finish the game. In the position, rather this, Alexander the Wonder decided to take on g4, and this is in this position on move 36 that 1254 decided to resign the game, as there was nothing much to be done. The fact is, this fox is pinned, and basically you can't do anything to defend it. So you're just going to lose it, and with the back rank, you're just dead. So let's say, for example, you play gem to c5, then you can just perform Jin takes f5 with check. If you decide to get up, I guess there's this doing the job, or even something crazier, I don't know. Or maybe, if you decide to go here, maybe there's a lamp to f4 check, and you can't take, because this is this way. So after this, there's surely a way to get a mate. I guess this should do the job. I see that you don't have any square here, you don't have any square, any square, any square. Here this is controlled, and the king is checked right on the middle of the board. So you see that this is very brutal. So as there was nothing much to be done, this makes sense to resign the game here. So I hope you really like this encounter between 1254 and Alexander the Wanderer. We're going to see each other next time for the next encounter, and maybe finish this round 1. I guess we have 3 or 4 matches left to show, and then we will run into week 2, so round 2. So see you then. Bye.